I just want to thank the Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy, who have helped us organise this debate today. Now, just giving you a brief history, Pakistan's blasphemy law originated from about 1827, and it was introduced by the British in undivided India to protect the interests of different religious groups. And Pakistan took on this law when it was created, and it was during Zia's reign that he brought about some amendments. Namely, in 84 he brought in a law that banned Ahmadis from practicing their faith, and then in 86 the law was modified again to include the death penalty against anyone found guilty of defaming Islam. And there are many clauses in this law that cover issues like defiling a place of worship and defaming the Prophet. And you've all probably heard about Asyas Bibi's case, which resulted in the killing of Salman Taseer. She was a Christian woman, a labourer and a mother of 5, who the allegation against her is that she offended some Muslims co-workers who objected about her drinking from the same bowl of water. And it's claimed that in response she uttered some blasphemous words against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And she's now awaiting a death sentence, and Punjab Governor Salman Taseer famously spoke up in support of her, and as a result was gunned down by his own bodyguard. So my first question really is going to be to Wilson Chowdhury, and I'd just like to kind of ask why should we care about this particular case? Why should we care about Asyas?
Minister, I will start from the beginning. Obviously, as being a Pakistani Christian, it's often very difficult for us to bring to international attention the fact that persecution does exist in Pakistan. The blasphemy law of Pakistan has been used for people to enact persecution and subjugate the Christian minority, and often is used to fulfill personal enmities. In this case in particular, the Minister for the Minister for Minorities has investigated the case, and he's highlighted that the evidence provided was contrived, concocted, and that the case itself was based on their personal enmity. As such, here is a chance to really look for a way forward to remove this act which has constantly created this second-class citizenship for people of minority faiths, and that's not just Christians.
What about Dr. Asyas in response to, from an Ahmadi's perspective?
Well, I think the issue of Asyas' case is a very obvious example of disregard for human rights in Pakistan. Asyas was an illiterate peasant woman living in a neighborhood, and she had a dispute with the local families, and as a result of that, some neighbors reported her to the local Imam Maulvi, who went and reported her to the police, and the case was taken to the lower court, and she was sentenced to death, and she was in prison for 18 months until Taseer intervened. Now the point is that this Maulvi had not witnessed any act of blasphemy on part of Asyas. And this was just on the basis of hearsay. And we have a Muslim scholar, fortunately, on the panel, and he would very well know, there is this saying of the Holy Prophet, Lasal khabruk al-mu'aynade, that is, hearsay cannot be equated with what you actually see yourself. So the credibility depends on actually witnessing and seeing an incident. And in Islam, there is a great emphasis on the credibility of the witness. I cannot go into length of that, but there was no credibility, there was no base of accusing that woman of blasphemy, and she was just sentenced. And when Taseer intervened, he was also classified with her as a person who had made some blasphemous remark or insulted the Holy Prophet ﷺ, etc. So I think the whole thing is a very, very serious issue for the state, and it is Ahmadis too, you know, when you really study the amendments or the additions to the blasphemy law, 295C is very apparent, 290B is very apparent, that is, if somebody insults the Holy Quran, that is 295B, and if somebody insults the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it is 295C. And then you see that 298A, B, C are all directed at hitting the Ahmadis. And they're very specific that if an Ahmadi, whether he is Qadiani or whether he is Lahori, if he poses himself as a Muslim, that is, dresses up as a Muslim or uses the Muslim terminology, he could be sentenced to 3 years, or eventually, if he uses the Islamic terminology of...
sorry to interrupt you, thank you. I just wanted to go back on one point. I mean, we are going to talk about a more holistic feature, but just going back to Asya Bibi, I mean, I've seen in a lot of the commentary issuing about blasphemy law, we sort of have random quotations taken out of holy scriptures and then to justify a position here or there. So actually I wanted to ask Abdullah what your thoughts are, because it seems to be it seems at the moment the liturgy of religious scripture can be used to make one argument there or the other. So considering that you are the founder of Muslim Debate Initiative and so on, and you're trying to provide a consistent and positive image of Islam, very quickly, can you tell us what does Islam say about blasphemy law?
Well, firstly, I think anything can be twisted to be positive and negative. India has a high proportion of incidents of a sectarian nature, even though it's an avowedly secular state. So you have majority, a tyranny of the majority over the minority and so on. So secularism doesn't actually help anyway. But in terms of what Islam says, well, the Prophet Muhammad had this concept where the state obviously is based on Islam, and every Muslim has a religious obligation to obey the caliph, the caliphate, which is the only Islamic model that Muslims recognize according to our own sources. Then with non-Muslims, we don't expect non-Muslims obviously to obey the caliph for spiritual reasons, because they don't believe in Islam or caliphate. How can you subject them to Sharia law when they don't believe in it? So almost in a very much like the French philosopher Rousseau, the contract citizen, there is a contract that the Muslim community forms with non-Muslims, which is a contract of dhimma. And a dhimma, a protected person, is someone that basically they pay a tax, unless you're obviously you're a woman or you're infirm, you're elderly or disabled, and or a child, of course, and you essentially are protected. Your life, your wealth, your religious freedom is protected. You have the ability to express your difference of opinion with Muslims, that's not a problem. You even have intellectual debates. For example, the Jewish scholar Ibn Quraysh of Islamic Spain, Portugal, where I'm from, did very much write a book which was very much attacking Islam intellectually, and of course he wasn't attacked for being a blasphemer, but you had Ibn Hazm refute him likewise with another book to counter his arguments. The Prophet Muhammad said that anyone who harmed a dhimmi has harmed me. Now, seeing how much Pakistanis love the Prophet Muhammad, they're willing to kill for people who even want to repeal laws that protect the Prophet Muhammad's respect, how much more so should we be outraged when a dhimmi gets killed, because when the Prophet Muhammad equated the dhimmi to himself, saying that anyone who harms a dhimmi has harmed me. But the thing about Pakistan is, because it's kind of like somewhere in between Islam and secularism, this is a big grey area that no one really knows what to do. So you can't, the non-Muslim can't have the protection of Islam, because Pakistan's not a fully Islamic state, or if at all. And secularism doesn't provide any protection from sectarianism, as witnessed by Rwanda, Kenya, Thailand, Colombia, and so on and so forth, and of course, very much India.
Can I just stop you there? I mean, isn't it a difference between whether it's a civil law? I mean, at the end of the day, the Punjab governor was killed by his own bodyguard, and the fact is, what is the reaction to that particular murder itself, and how has the government and society responded to that? I mean, the fact is, you cannot just kill your leaders if you disagree with them, surely.
Well, you know, it's very interesting because the Western liberal tradition of history enlightenment was all about killing your leaders because you disagreed with them, mainly because they oppressed you and were corrupt and so on and so forth. I'm not advocating killing the leaders, by the way.
I just want to bring in, sorry, Abdul Rahman Malik. What do you make of what Abdullah's saying here?
Abdullah comes from a very particular position, and that's fine. And I think there's fairness in sort of debating that position out. But I think really, I think the question that tonight's topic really alludes to is, and I think the thing that we have to understand is really the political role these blasphemy laws play in Pakistan, and the way they've been utilized and are being used, not just by people who are avowedly secular, but people who are avowedly religious. And if there's anything Islamic about law, it should be the rule of law, it should be due process. That's at the very heart of any Muslim's understanding of the Sharia. And I think what we've seen with the Taseer assassination and the promotion by certain religious elements within Pakistan of vigilante justice seems to fly against the very principles of not just Islamic faith, but of Islamic law, of Islamic civilization, and a very, very complex legal tradition.
But
I think this is what really is of concern, is that we have a discourse in Pakistan, a religious discourse, but ignoring the very fundamentals that it seeks to stake claim to. And I think this presents a very, very difficult situation for all concerned. I think anyone who's concerned about Pakistan, if you're concerned about the laws, do you think that the laws are going to be changed? Let's leave aside the question of good or bad. I think most people say that probably the laws as they are right now are pretty horrible. But the question really is no longer one of whether these laws are going to change or not. In this current circumstance in Pakistan, in the current climate, do you think legal change is going to take place? I don't think so. And in fact, I believe, and I think the columnist Musharraf Zaidi made this point very effectively a few weeks ago, entering into the debate about whether blasphemy laws are right or wrong in this current political circumstance in Pakistan, I think we should certainly have space to discuss them here, will actually backfire and give credence and give succor to those who are basing their argument against the blasphemy law and are using this to promote a very kind of uber conservative sort of Islamic Tea Party agenda.
Could I add a little bit? I think it's important to understand what blasphemy is. And if you look up Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, you see that it's a 13th century word. So it's been there for a very, very long time. And it basically is insulting or showing contempt or lack of reverence for God, or claiming the attributes of deity, or irreverence towards something considered sacred or inviolable like the prophets. So that's the basic the definition of it. And then we must remember that Pakistan is not the only country which has blasphemy laws. The blasphemy laws exist, even in European countries, Austria, Denmark, Canada, Germany, Greece, they all have blasphemy laws. And the largest Muslim state, Indonesia, has blasphemy laws, but the punishment for blasphemy is not death in Indonesia. So these things have to be noted. And the other important thing is that the question is whether blasphemy is divine or is it man-made. So the laws that have been made are man-made. They have been erected by man. So as such, those laws can definitely be improved. They can be reviewed. They can be reformed. So that provision is available. It is not a word from the Holy Scripture, the Holy Quran, which cannot be changed. So therefore, the new movement in Pakistan to review and reform the blasphemy laws is something which is the right of the people. If there is something in legislation, they see it is not being practiced or it is being abused, they can always put it right. And this is the issue and confrontation between the religious parties and the intellectuals of Pakistan and some politicians as well.
So it's a man-made law.
Can I add something to
Can
this?
I say something?
I just wanted to respond to...
Okay, that's fine.
I think let's kind of start with Rabia and then we'll kind of come back.
Okay, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. I'm listening to all of you. I think there are two major issues that I see that are coming very clear. One, Pakistan has become polarized. The gap between the right and the left, people have become very confused. Either you're with America or you're anti-America, so that means you're a radicalist or you're a very liberal person. And then it brings to light, Asyas case brings to light, a very strong issue of how a law is being abused and misused in Pakistan. Over the historical references, like the gentleman there said, this law is in all the countries. All the European countries have it too. The UK repealed it in the 1980s. But this law is not part of Pakistan's constitution. It's part of the penal code. And this law is a heritage from the British Raj. Now, the law needs to be looked at in the light that it cannot be abused and misused as it's being done. But then there are other laws. I'm not going to state my view, but I'm just going to lay out some facts. There are other laws which are also being abused and misused. For example, people being sent to Guantanamo Bay from here. I mean, they're not even given the right to appeal. And there have been wars in the name of religion, and Islam is being targeted for that. And you can look at the Crusades, you can look at the Jewish persecutions, you can look at the Hindus, burning of the Christian villages. I'm not saying this law is right or wrong, I'm saying it's being misused and abused. People like scholars like Gandhi and Islamic scholars who've been killed in the name of Islam or being, in the name of religion and being too liberal, have died, and Gandhi's left, and he's now sitting in Malaysia. So from our perspective, there are other major issues in Pakistan at the moment. There's corruption, there's rape of women, there is women's rights, the whole country is falling apart, there's economic crisis. Should we be focusing too much on the blasphemy?
That's actually a very, very interesting point.
Focusing on trying to stop the abuse of it through our legal system and through putting some checks and processes in place. Over the last 3 to 4 years, nobody has been hung or nobody's been given the death punishment of this law in Pakistan. But like I said, it's all over. And my last point is that if the law is being abused and misused, it states the failure of the state. The state has failed in its act and it's failed in serving its people, and this was not Qaid Azam's vision.
So there are more important issues.
No, I'm not quantifying that. All I'm saying is Asyas case needs to be reviewed. She's guilty, not guilty. It needs to be given over to the legal process now, and we need to assess. We say judiciary is free. We need to take that into account. But all I'm saying is we're talking about blasphemy law, but there are other major issues in Pakistan which are more devastating for the country.
I think we need to be careful here. Obviously, today's debate is about the blasphemy law. Its title itself suggests that we're here to discuss that. I agree there are other external issues, and it's good that we do discuss those too. However, we live in a pluralistic society here in the UK, and when you think about the blasphemy law we had, that was actually revoked in 2008. And when it was revoked, it was revoked on the basis that it didn't afford protection to people of other faiths, including the Muslim people that brought a case against Salman Rushdie in 1987. So we need to take this into account, and if we go back to this introduction of the blasphemy law by the British back in 1827, that's correct under the Indian Penal Code. But at the time, it was universally applicable to all faiths. And it wasn't a blasphemy law as such, it was more a public order act. And that's what we need to get off this blasphemy law, the British introducing the blasphemy law. It wasn't a blasphemy law, it was a public order act, much like the existing racial and religious hatred act that we have here in the UK now. And if we're going to go forward, then we have to be able to consider that Pakistan has signed international human rights conventions. So they're actually obliged to ensure that people have the opportunity of freedom of expression of their faith, that they have freedom of conscience. In the case of Asia Bibi, she expressed, her comment itself was simply, my Christ died for me, what did Muhammad do for you? And it was more, we can say these things freely in religious debate here in the UK because we can discuss, the intent was not to show that Muhammad done anything less, but just to show that Christ made the ultimate sacrifice in giving his life, that we might live, as that may be the perspective of Christians. So we have to be very, very careful when we say the blasphemy law doesn't have to be changed. The BPCA itself believes that the best way forward is a return of the blasphemy law, of the Public Order Act itself, to its original form under the British, which is just 295. The 295A, B and C are all Islamicizations that occurred in 1981, 1986 and 1984, and these acts themselves bring about the prejudices. They stir up the dissension, they create the second class, and in the case of Ahmadis, and I hate to say this, third class citizenship. And until we address these issues as a principle, we'll still be debating this for years on.
I just want to stop you there because I want to come back to this.
Can I just add something else?
I think just
very briefly. If I could just say something very briefly, which is I think that what you just said has really just basically struck at a really obvious thing about the blasphemy law as it currently stands, which doesn't really get discussed enough. Certainly in the case of Pakistan, which is to say that regardless of what one thinks about whether, blaspheming should be a crime, the current law in Pakistan doesn't seem to suit that purpose. If you look at the statistics, about 50% of those who are charged under the blasphemy law come from Pakistan's religious minorities, and most of those people are poor. But if you look at the demographics of the country, those minorities only make 3% of the population. So it's very clear that already this law is being misused and abused. Now, you only have to be a first-year law graduate to look at the law and to understand that on the face of it, it has some very clear problems. And certainly Amnesty has focused on that and has noticed that as it currently stands, it fails international recognised standards of human rights. There is no aspect of criminal intent in the law. There's no basis for providing evidence in the law. Not just Asia Bibi's case, but even cases involving Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, other people in Pakistan, there's often no evidence provided. And even though there's been attempts in the past to compel the police to investigate, to this day that's not happening. So I think that's something that really needs to be focused on, that this law even is failing at its stated aim, which is to prevent blasphemy.
I think I'd also like to add to that by saying that before 1988, since between 1988 and 2005, there were 647 cases that were brought for prosecution under the blasphemy law. Before that, there were only about 22 since 1947. And it's quite interesting that it's only after 295 ABC and all these amendments were made that people have started bringing, people to court for blasphemy law. So it's almost like, and again, as you said, 50% of them have been minority groups, and the other 50%, if you really look at the cases, it's very well documented. It's all over the internet these days on each of the cases and what they were for. They were mainly for political gain or rights of property, stuff like that. So I completely agree, and I think that. And I don't think it's a question about, whether the law is right or not. I think we've come to a point in Pakistan where this law is almost used to bail murder, as in the Salman Taseer murder recently. And people are actually, hailing people as heroes for using the blasphemy law, again, in a completely different light. Just because of one law, you can't say that the rule of law, i.e. that murder is wrong. It's almost like subservient to blasphemy, and so I think that it's quite evident that the blasphemy law is wrong. It's being used incorrectly, and yes, either we use it as a public order like it used to be when we inherited from the British, or it does need to be changed and reviewed, or it needs to be repealed completely.
But what about the way in which the government has responded to Taseer's death itself? So Dari didn't even go to his funeral.
Yeah, the Dari didn't go to his funeral. Even the Chief Minister of Punjab did not attend his funeral. The funny thing is, not even one. They had to wait about 12 hours to even get a priest to come and say the funeral prayers. No one would even come and say funeral prayers because they were actually he was almost looked like as a blasphemer, and then all he did was go up to a poor woman who couldn't afford a lawyer and was charged with a lot of things by a mullah who wasn't even there when apparently she said things, and so it just shows that this issue has become very, very inflated because of one law and of a law that should be very, very under other laws such as murder.
But doesn't it show a kind of inherent disregard, in a sense, for what's actually going on? I mean, the fact that nobody's actually come out and actually actively or publicly condemned it in those strong words. I mean, I want to bring in Hamad here, really.
I mean, they haven't condemned it because of the legacy of the law itself, creating so much fear and hatred and violence as a result. I mean, that's kind of the bigger problem with the law, as much as the technical failures of it as a law, is the legacy of it. The legacy of the law and the legacy of the makers of the law, i.e., the US-backed general under whose regime this law came into being in the first place. I mean, it strikes me as so strange that even if you're talking about defending Islam, you're leaning on a British law that was basically manipulated by a US-backed dictator in Pakistan for your support, for the way in which you would look to seek to support a religion that is much stronger.
I think I just want to add something. Sorry, I just want to say that I think we've seen a bit of a disconnect between what the diaspora, as represented in this panel, and what the people of Pakistan seem to be saying. I mean, judging by what this panel is saying, Pakistan seems to be this liberal utopia. Now, either the media is spinning it around, or are we not seeing demonstrations for the assassin of, Salman Taseer, for the assassin, not for the assassined governor? So I don't know what the sort of disconnect is. We've been hearing on the panel just now that how liberal it is, how wrong it is, but let's be honest, 80% of Pakistan doesn't seem to be disagreeing with that. And
I have three comments to make on that. The first thing on the government side is I think the reason why the government actually hasn't come up and said anything or condemned this publicly is because the government is weak. I mean, forget the blasphemy law, just look at fiscal insolvency that's going on in Pakistan right now. The government they think that more revenue is not a requirement. They also think that less expenditure is not a requirement, but more money will still be spent. I mean, that is insanity. And when they tried to go and increase taxes, etc., on petrol, the MQM went and revolted, and hence they revoked it. So the coalition is so weak, and they're so scared of people coming out of the streets and losing their Islamic parties who are in coalition, that they're not going to go and condemn it because they're in a very, very weak position, even fiscally, forget socially or in any other way. Secondly, as far as Pakistan is a liberal utopia, that is obviously not the case. We have again, it's very, very polarized right now. You have like the very right, and then you have the liberal extremists, and the views are, the point is that the people like the Jamaat-e-Islami, the Tehreek-e-Sunnis, all the other Tehreeks are very, very good when it comes to street politics. They can bring out 50,000 people on the street, and this happens all the time.
Could you describe liberal extremists?
Sorry?
Could you describe what you mean by liberal extremism?
No, I just said when you say
because we have to be careful when we say this comment.
Okay, I would say I'm a liberal extremist, and I'm very, very happy to be so that I'm a liberal extremist because I do believe in liberal principles, and I do believe in sectarianism. And when I mean polarized, I don't mean that it's me against someone who's very, very conservative. I just mean that people's views are very, very no one's really in the middle anymore, and if they are, then they're trying to take sides, and it's very, very difficult.
But have you noticed that for Muslims, a Muslim extremist or an Islamic extremist is very bad. Liberal extremist, oh, you're a hero, everyone likes you, that's good, you're brave. Someone is right, everything is wrong.
No, when I say the far right, I mean people who are actually going and hailing.
I believe it does, my friend. Iraq called to spread democracy, liberal extremism at its best.
Any person is going and hailing Mr. Qadri as a hero and is going in, and people who are going in, putting petals on, at his house and going in feeding sweets and mithai to his family. I'm sorry, yes, I do think that they're religious fundamentalists, and I don't think that they necessarily know or are as read in Islam as you are, or that they should be, and that they're using the blasphemy law as not only as anti-Islamic and portraying Pakistan in a very, very bad light, but also for their own gain. And so yes, when I meant to say that, fundamentalists, yes, I do consider people who go and hail Qadri as a hero, as a Ghazi al-Medin, as a fundamentalist. Yes, I do.
Just a couple of points there. It's really an amazing debate because it just shows where we're all coming from. But the basic is we're all, we believe in Islam and we believe in some other religion. And all religions teach peace. We are not supposed to take anybody's life in our hands. So Salman Taseer's killing is a murder and it should be treated as a murder. And when I was there, this happened, and in Mansehra there were rallies to promote and to be jubilant about what Qadri did. This is the state's failure of not reacting to it and not condoning it. Just like we said, the government was not even condoning it, which is absolutely wrong. Salman Taseer was a very key ally of the BBP government. But again, it comes down to how do we stop the law being abused and misused, and to curtail speech and to limit the freedom of the people of Pakistan. Pakistan was created for all people.
But should we have a law?
You need representation, so you need representation. I mean, you're right, Pakistan is not a liberal utopia, it's not liberal. In fact, I think there's not even liberal countries or liberal utopias by any definition. But just look at statistics. What do the Pakistani people want? I don't care about the government, I don't care about the West, I don't care about their, Pakistani agents in Pakistan. What do Pakistani people want? Yeah, according to the Pew survey, 88% of Pakistan wanted Islam to play a large role in politics. According to the University of Maryland poll 2007, 79% support Sharia and 74% support establishing a caliphate in Pakistan. This is what the University of Maryland people have said. Yeah, in the poll asked Pakistanis. Why don't we ask Pakistanis what they want? And if you are truly Democrats, like you claim you are, then you'll support what the people want.
Yeah, completely. Okay, so let's also put some more statistics on the ground. 70% of the people in Pakistan do not even know how to write their name. They're not educated. Their books the education syllabus actually hasn't been changed since 1977. They're still being taught as young children hatred for Jews and Christians, etc., etc. Recently, I was in Pakistan in December. I picked up my this child's book. She studies in the government school in cavalry grounds in Pakistan, and it literally had, I don't even want to repeat it. It was so rude. Nasty things about Jews, nasty things about Christians, and I was like, she was in 4th grade, and I was like, is this seriously being thrown down you? And so obviously you have people who can't read, can't even write their names, and you have people in government schools who are being taught completely rubbish information. And 3, most people who are taught the Quran or Islamic belief are in the madrasa, and the madrasa is teaching them stuff like what we're seeing today, that you can kill someone in the name of blasphemy law. That is completely incorrect.
Please, I don't think you should patronize. I don't think you should patronize the Pakistani people saying they can't read. You should listen to them because they're not educated. We're educated. Listen to us. We know better for Pakistan. This is what I'm getting, right? The thing is, Islam brings...
You're basically saying, which is what I hope that you will say on this panel, is that the madrasas and the mullahs in Pakistan today are teaching the correct version of Islam. And
I'm saying it's because the state.
For people to
I just want to bring in someone else.
If I can quickly interject.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Abdullah, the point in that, if you're looking at the Pakistani people and you're talking about what they want, then the demonstrations in the wake of this killing will give you the numbers. You don't have to do a poll. There were like 50,000 people in favor of the blasphemy, or not touching the blasphemy laws, and about, I don't know, hundreds or scores, liberals, for example, for the changes. But I think that this discussion, the language has been poisoned in a way that because Pakistan is so polarized, it is going to be one of the most dangerous ways of dealing with the issues that the country faces, is to have liberals on one side and then have conservatives, or whatever you want to call it, fundamentalists on the other side, because essentially people are, there's no problem that's being solved. People are dying, people are in fear. I think that the language has to change, and I don't just mean in the words we use, but I do actually mean the language. I mean that Urdu has to be an important part of the debate. I mean, you can say certain things in English in Pakistan, and you can't say certain things in Urdu. It's almost like there's a divide right down the middle. So there has to be a bringing together of people in Pakistan, and we can't have them divided in this way, because that is the route to breakup and to destruction.
I think
just one point here. So just one point. The war in Pakistan has not just radicalized the youth there, it's radicalized the Muslims abroad as well. We are either right or wrong. There is no middle ground. That's what polarization is. That's what radicalization is.
For sure, that's what this debate's here to discuss, and I think we seem to be missing the point again. The original context of this meeting was, is the blasphemy law good for Pakistan? We seem to, we're talking about cultural change, we're talking about addressing the lack of education, and I should say that Christians themselves only reach 10%, only 10% of them achieve a level of literacy in Pakistan, and there's a bias in the educational system. Islam is taught in schools across the sector. Why not bring about, if you're going to bring about cultural change, I will go off the subject in a moment, if you're going to bring about cultural change, why not introduce a fair religious studies, overall broader education like we have here in the UK, so people actually understand each other's faith, they lack those misconceptions, and are able to engage in sensible and informed debate. Moreover, it's evident that even within the Muslim class within Pakistan, that if I'm correct with statistics, 69% of Muslims in Pakistan are not clear on the precepts of their own faith. So they're very easily polarised or taught incitement to hatred by imams that can be rogue. I'm not saying that I'm being careful what I say, but there can be imams that are rogue, and we have to be conscious of this. So there is a specific need for the Lima councils to intervene, ensuring that a broad spectrum of inspections take place, and that there is a standard use of the tannoy systems. But coming back to the issue, is the blasphemy law good for Pakistan? The BBC says no, not in its existing form, not in its Islamicised form. Let's go back to the original Public Order Act, just 295, which I'm sure most of us here would agree is probably the fairest way forward for all, where it respects people of all faiths, all ilks, and hopefully, if you look at it carefully, respects people of no faith.
I think what the gentleman has said is absolutely right, because the abuse of blasphemy law is so extensive. Somebody mentioned a very small figure, but actually more than 4,000 cases of blasphemy have been taken to courts from 1985 till now, and over 3,000 of them are Ahmadis. And how are Ahmadis prosecuted? On the simple acts of greeting each other, saying Assalamu alaikum. Somebody goes and reports that he's used an Islamic terminology, or writing Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Such people are prosecuted under blasphemy law. And the question is, if there is a blasphemy law, it should be a blasphemy law for all. Why target one particular community? Why put in clauses targeting Ahmadis or Christians or Hindus, etc., etc.? A law is a law, and a law is for the country and for all people. As such, there is definitely a need to review and reform that law so that it serves its purpose as it serves the purpose in other countries of the world. And as I mentioned, it is there in Indonesia as well, but people are not prosecuted every day for these little things like using Islamic terminology.
So, I mean, there's one more thing that I'd like to mention here is that, we have this blasphemy law, and fair enough, it's been there, and lots of people have been prosecuted, and now, because the governor of Pakistan, of Punjab was trying to not to defend, but trying to enter a plea to the president of the country for Asyas baby, he was shot. And the way that it stands right now is that no one in government has come and condemned murder, and the case of Qadri, i.e. the murderer, has not even reached the high, like this, the way that the law forms, it's not even gone to the High Court, and people are still celebrating the fact that it was okay to murder this person. So we know, in the panel and in the room, that it takes quite a few years and months to go and change the blasphemy law. So are we in that kind of position now that tomorrow I can, if I don't particularly like someone, I can just take them, under the blasphemy law and, get them, get their life and, whatever. Or, if I'm going to stand up and say that actually I believe that this blasphemy law should be changed, I'm going to get murdered and nothing's going to get done. So we're basically completely anarchic. And murder is such a big thing in any society, and it's it has to be condemned at some level. But right now, anyone can go and either, even whether you defend it or you're against it, you can go and kill people. So does that mean that we're going to stay that anarchy?
I think we must also appreciate that Taseer was the target of hatred and opposition right from the time he joined PPP in 1988. And there have been so many moves by the Punjab government to try to dishonor him. For instance, there were so many threats against him, and there was the threat that the governor house will be torched and burned down, and there was a threat to his life. And he asked the government to provide him with a bulletproof car. This was as late as 31st December, and the government refused. They said they will not do it. And then there were such lame excuses that when he went to see off his family going to Dubai, they just said he was contravening Article 6 and 106 of the Constitution, leaving the country without informing the government. Such excuses have been made against Taseer all along, and his position, appointment, as you know, was very much resented by the present government of Punjab. When he was appointed a governor in May 2008, immediately they said the facts of his appointment was fake, and he was actually not appointed. And then there was this. Recently, the papers in Pakistan reported that the leader of the governing party in Punjab had been informed that the governor of Punjab will be changed, and the rumor started that
I'm not sure
Taseer will be removed.
I'm not sure that helps. I understand your argument, but can I bring some structure back to this? I think we need to get back to the basics. Before 1985, there wasn't 22 cases, there were only 10. Since Islamisation, that's when you've seen the increase. We've heard quotes of 675, we've heard quotes of over 3,000. Whatever the number is, which I think is close to 675, up to 2005, you will find that it has increased significantly since the amendments were made. They need to be removed. Another point that everyone has missed is that those that actually abuse the law can be prosecuted under Section 153A of the Pakistan Penal Code. Yet we never hear of any cases being taken against these perpetrators of violence. Why does that never happen? And what we need to see a cultural change, a legalistic change, a change to the way that the government operates, and perhaps, I hate to bring this into it, a constitutional change. Are we not immediately creating second, third, whatever fourth-class citizenship when we say that Pakistan is an Islamic state? Does it have to be an Islamic state? Does it need to have Islam as its primary faith within its constitution when it has a 96% majority Muslim population anyway?
Okay, Wilson.
Are these things fundamentally necessary?
What I would just like to say is that what I'm noticing in the panel, wait, Myra, I think everybody's trying to say something. It's really strange to me that we're having a disconnect between the endangered minorities, I include the Ahmadis, Christians, and liberal extremists like Myra, and versus the mainstream. Where is Pakistan's mainstream? I mean, I feel like we have, who can come out and speak for our mainstream? Mustafa Ahmad or Mustafa, one of you guys. What is Pakistan? Where is Pakistan's mainstream? Then how come,
It's a nice, easy task to represent the mainstream. I just want to say one thing. I mean, a lot of things have been said. Obviously, I can't really comment on those. But in terms of the support for Qadri, one thing that really has to be borne in mind, and I'm not trying to justify it at all, of course not, but that people are basically seeing this as a governor and a Christian woman who are insulting the Prophet. And that's just not on. So when Qadri killed the governor, then he was basically standing up for the Prophet. Whether we like it or not, it's quite clear where we stand on that point. That is how people see it. And the reason for that is that those who benefit from seeing it that way have been much more successful at getting that message across. And authorities have effectively failed in their responsibility to to basically say that, well, actually there are problems with this law. They promised, this is the government, that they would reform the laws, but then they suddenly went silent. The moment there was any kind of noise on the street, they went silent. We don't really know to what extent the population of Pakistan, a majority, supports the killer. What we do know is that his supporters are very loud, and that when they do come out, people get scared. But the thing to really stress is that if there is support for this killer in Pakistan, it's because there's a perception that the governor and the Christian woman was insulting the Prophet, and it's a misunderstanding, and that's really critical to understand what's going on.
But why do you think that is, you see? Firstly, one gentleman said it very correctly, that where is the Pakistani mainstream? And he said the audience. So and actually, I think quite apt. Now, I think a lot of us here probably don't even represent. I'm even Portuguese. What am I even doing on the panel? Yeah. However, as an unbiased party in this, and just trying to argue from the Islamic perspective, the people do not see the government as representing them. So what they do is they take the law into their own hands. Of course, they're not distinguished jurists, and even the Maulvis and mullahs who have no experience of high Islamic jurisprudence don't understand how to apply Islamic law.
So people don't see the government as representing.
Because we see all these unrest and problems in Pakistan, people hating Zardari, otherwise known as Mr. 10%.
I would agree with that.
And so the only solution is to have a government that represents them, which at the same time can protect the Christians and be believed and carry currency, which is a caliphate state, which has religious authority in Pakistan. People would respect it, and it would say, well, look, these are the people who are protected by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can't hurt a Christian or a Jew or a Qadiani, whoever, because you will be hurting the Prophet Muhammad by doing so. And then see how many Pakistanis break that law when they know that there is Islamic weight behind that.
Can I just say on this whole mainstream point, what is a Pakistani? They're a Sufi, they're Wahhabi, they're Sunni, they're Shia, they're Pathan, they're Baloch, they're Urdu-speaking, many other groups. They're men and they're women. They come from many different classes, many different political parties. The thing is that even on the Islamic point, that we have so many different faces and interpretations, that the whole idea that somehow the mainstream of Pakistanis is hidden and actually there is one set formula for giving them representation. It's just a mythology. But whatever it might be.
I'd just like to add something. Mustafa, I'd just like to add something. We always tend to somehow talk about the diversity of Pakistan, and I loved hearing our national anthem being repeated that we're diverse. But Mumtaz Qadri was part of the Barelvi tradition. That's the tradition that we liberal, not me, but I'm saying the liberal Gucci Pakistanis, Meyer-esque types, they love to defend. So what I want to ask you is, when even the liberal Muslims are killing Governor Taseer, then what hope is there for, these are the liberals.
Also, sorry, in the West, I think you'll find there is Democrat, conservative, social democrat, socialist. They have all different kinds of parties in the West. What, do you see them all collapsing or not being able to unify? Sorry? No. You have different interpretations, and that's fine. Islam believes in pluralism within interpretation, that's fine. But you have one government, the majority being, let's say, Hanafi Sunni in Pakistan. They might take control for a bit, maybe a Shia Caliph next time, if the Shias will become Caliph. Yeah, so, but across the board, Sufis, Shias, Hanafis, Maliki, Shafis, Hanbalis, whoever, we all believe in Islamic State and Khilafah, historically. And I challenge anyone in this panel, including my radical middle-way friend, to prove me otherwise.
Can I interject on this one? So, it's just a short point, but I think we're all forgetting here that Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims can actually live in peace in Pakistan until they're incited to hatred. And often, when the violence occurs, it's because a Maulvi has spoken on a tannoy and encouraged people to go and attack these cities. So to say that the entirety of Pakistan is radical, well, I won't say radical, but is supportive of an Islamic republic or the Sharia law, the introduction of a more strong sense of Sharia law, is actually a fallacy. We don't know that. What we do know is that they can live in peace until these acts occur, and that's when the situation becomes polarised, and that's what we need to look at. How can we stop that polarisation? One way is to use existing laws. Use 1538. When people use the blasphemy law incorrectly, make sure they're punished so that they learn from that and they stop repeating the errors that we keep seeing. How about, you don't need a strong government for that. You need a strong legal system. You need them to be backed by the government, and not, and again, you need the people to be. One other thing another benefit that we could introduce to Pakistan, especially with the funding that Britain sent over, 665 million, 225 million of that, which was specifically for improving education, is introduce a base level of education for all people. The Pakistani minorities only achieve 10% literacy. Let's get them level with the Muslim majority, which only achieve a 40% literacy, then work on improving their overall education system. Finally, my last point is perhaps we can work on cultural programs. Things like art. Art has been intrinsically linked to improving culture. We know that the statue of Alison Lapper in Trafalgar Square did more in promoting the social form, the social model of welfare for the state, social model of disability, and in opposition to the welfare model of disability. Why not have something commemorating Salman Taseer, a great humanitarian?
That point, Wilson, because I think the issue that's come out is a lot to do with education and how do we, whether.
But let's not forget the blasphemy law as well. That is what this discussion is about.
Law at all is another point that I think has been debated. There is a debate in Pakistan about this, about whether or not we need a law at all. And I think Dr. Asyas also mentioned as well the issue of education and how to
take out face on passports. Why should we be labelled? It's not prejudice in itself.
It's polarisation. I just want to bring Hamad in again about the whole issue that Pakistan needs a Caliphate state, and maybe that we need more education, perhaps.
We need more education. We need more of a lot of things. But I just go back to you mentioned artists, and artists are like lepers in Pakistan. When I go there and I'm trying to make a film, I feel like just.
What have your experiences been with Slakistan, for example?
Well, just recently I found out that we've been sort of banned in Pakistan for certain words, relating to religion or language or various things. So, and they're so irrational. They're so not based in any kind of laws that it just reeks of fear. Fear on the part of the authorities who cannot act in a kind of irrational way. And there is a parallel with the blasphemy laws. They can't even talk about changing the law. They can't even talk about rational, reasonable debate because they're living in fear. They're basically apologists for extremists.
I just want to sort of wrap this up before I move pass on questions to the audience, but it's really about this issue that's come up about, I think Rabia mentioned about polarisation and extremism being one factor as to why this debate around blasphemy, in a sense, is being stifled in Pakistan. So I just want to get some quick, brief points from each member about what you feel.
Can I give my few points?
Sure.
I've just made a list. I think blasphemy law, or any law, Pakistan needs the rule of law, so that the issue of minorities, majorities, everybody falls under one rule of law. There should be no prejudices, which we don't have at the moment. We need legal reforms, we need educational reforms, and the lack of awareness is because of uneducation. And like you said, minorities are suffering, the majorities are suffering. We're one of the most uneducated countries in that area of the world. And we also must get our legal rights and our awareness in the minority and including women. So blasphemy is there, it needs to be curtailed, it needs to be stopped being misused and abused, but there are things that we can do with that.
I think we have to appreciate this point, that the fault line of the blasphemy law is the encouragement by the mullahs of Pakistan that if you kill somebody for blasphemy, you go straight to heaven and you become a ghazi. And this thing is very difficult to control in Pakistan. Even if you change the law, what are you going to do with these mullahs who are still going to encourage people to kill others on the basis of blasphemy? How are you going to stop that? So it is not so much the change of the law as the change of the attitude and the thinking of the mullahs themselves. Because even if the law is changed, you still have those people who will incite others to kill others on the basis of faith or religion or whatever difference is. The Ahmadis will be continued to be killed, Christians will be continued to be sentenced to death, etc. because of those people. And we have seen that. 50,000 people came out on the streets of Karachi just to promote Mumtaz Hussain as the Ghazi, who had killed an innocent leader of the country, a very intellectual person. So I think those are the very important points that we have to consider. The whole society needs to be restructured. We were just talking about education. Education system in Pakistan at present is divided into 3 totally disconnected sectors. There is the madrasa education, where children are taught and trained by the mullahs, and then there is the state system, which is totally neglected. There are no provisions in the state system, no textbooks, no furniture, nothing. Nobody knows what is happening. And then you have the English medium schools, the elitists who go there. Their thinking is totally different. The state school going children and students, they think totally different. And the madrasa people think totally different. Now where are we going to create one nation of Pakistan, which is going to be the base of our values and our aspirations or whatever it is? So there are some very serious questions about this issue.
Of course, again, I have mentioned this before, but many of the points that you've raised there have solutions. As I've said, why not have a basic religious education rather than Islamic studies, so that everybody understands the peace of one another's faith and can discuss, learn, and just work out what links us rather than what divides us. Moreover, you've also talked about the Alima Council, well, not the Alima Council, but the tannoys and the use of those by Maulvis to incite hatred. Should there not be a main Ulema Council that is scrutinised by the government that produces standards of practice for the use of the tannoy, so that we don't see these infringements, so that a system is created to remove volatile imams? One last point, if I could just make one last point.
Very quickly.
I am very sorry about this. And again, we talked about education. Yes, the Muslim majority lacks education, but we need to level off the disparity first before we start focusing on a more comprehensive educational reform.
And the first is that all these recommendations are amazing. I mean, yes, this is exactly what I'm thinking. We definitely need educational reform. We definitely need to control what is being taught in our madrasas. We definitely need to have, government agencies set up to see what's going into educational manuscripts and study books and, better schooling, etc., and more awareness. However, I mean, I hate to say this, but if you ever go to Pakistan, if you've seen what Pakistan is going through right now, the kind of money that they have to spend, it's a very, very utopian concept. They're amazing concepts, and yes, I hope that they will be implemented one day. But in the short term, right now, we have this blasphemy law case, and again, you keep bringing the point that this is the debate about blasphemy law, and in the blasphemy law, currently, we're also saying that it needs to be reviewed, or it'll be great if it could go back to its original state, and we can take away these amendments. But as we speak right now, anyone in Pakistan, whether they're high profile or not, and they say something against the blasphemy law, they're getting death threats. An example is Sharia Rahman. She was the only MP who stood up and said, I do not believe, I believe that yes, this law could definitely be reformed. She gets something like 3 death threats every half an hour. People in Salman Taseer's family, they're perpetually getting death threats. They have nothing to do with this. Their father, their husband, Taseer was taken away. However, his family continues to get death threats. There are other people who are arranging rallies. There's one on the 31st of January. There are a couple of others planned in early Feb. All of these people are constantly getting death threats. So, I mean, it's amazing to talk about how we can reform society and what kind of education we can get and what this blasphemy law could become it. But as we stand right now, even if you speak against blasphemy law, you're getting death threats, you're getting awful things said about you, you're getting, the fact, a death threat is pretty bad, right? We're going to kill you, or stuff like, we're going to come and firebomb your office, etc., etc. And so, right now, I think the most important thing is that the rule of law rises up and says that actually anyone who hails, anyone here who hails Qadri, to be a hero is wrong, because that is a murder. And once the law sort of takes this murder into its own hands, people will start saying that you cannot crown or shower with petals people who are murderers, and that's the only way things are going to calm down. Otherwise, and then this blasphemy law can be taken further. But right now, it's just anarchy.
You see, the aftermath of Taseer's assassination has shown that the government does not have the courage to face up to the mullahs, and they have now said that we are not going to change or discuss the blasphemy law at all. They have just withdrawn, the talk and debate that was going on in the country.
Okay,
so the question is it the government that is ruling Pakistan, or is it the mullahs who are ruling Pakistan?
Mariam, you want to let's ask a question from the audience. We'll take one question and keep it short and sweet. You know what? Can you just wait for the microphone, because otherwise the whole hall won't be able to hear you. So just where's the microphone? Yeah. The first one will take in one, and then you'll take 4 or 5. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't you go? Yeah. Can you keep it short and sweet, please? Because we want to get as many questions as possible.
So much has been said, and I have been waiting for people talking to react to that. First of all, I want to congratulations on organizing this debate. So many points come out. I appreciate what Rabia said. Actually, every time this was a very good thing. Is that on? Yes. Yeah. First, couple of corrections. Mr. Zardari didn't go to the funeral. We don't know why. It was probably security. Shahbaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif didn't go to the funeral because they were stopped. Because they were told security reasons. They went there afterwards and paid their respects. When everybody was gone, yeah, they went there. Now, I have a question. I think I was really very patiently waiting to put a question to Dr. Ayad, but he has eventually answered himself. It is the culture that has to change. Change the law. It won't make any difference. There are people out there
what's your question, sir?
Very emotional, very worked up. You can't stop them. They will do what they believe is right. So tinkering with the law, changing the law.
Yeah, so we need to take two. Can you please come to your question?
Yes.
Because we want to what is your question?
Well, I wanted to make these. My question was that you are actually if you let me make one comment, it's a very important question.
This is the last comment.
Yes, we were a divided society, and we are getting more divided. I asked questions to those people, to Christians, to MDs, Brahmins, whatever. It is the terrorists, it's the extremists who are doing the damage. The people, they bombed the market. They bombed the marketplace where men, women, and children died. The bomb didn't know.
We haven't got a question.
The bomb wouldn't know the Christian who's.
Can I come back to that?
Therefore, please, when you speak about the bad condition in Pakistan, speak against extremism. Speak against extremism.
If I can just come back to
We're going to take 2 or 3 questions. Please keep it short. Okay, short. Salah, can you take from the gentleman with the blue shirt? And can you go short and sweet, please? I'm going to be a fascist here.
I promise to ask short.
First the guy.
Okay, my biggest.
I don't think it's good.
My biggest complaint from this debate is the fact that you mentioned a disconnect, and the reason why there is a big disconnect here is because of the lack of presence of a mainstream, high-profile blasphemy support. I mean, I'm not supporting blasphemy. The debate should have been more, I would say, productive or useful.
Okay, are you going to ask a question or are you going to make a statement?
That is the question I like to ask is that why have you not invited someone who could have actually come here and
because we couldn't find one. We couldn't find one in the UK.
Because all of you, whatever all of you have said is pretty much the same thing, using different tones and different expression. So that is my...
I don't think that...
I disagree, but it doesn't matter. I mean, let's just go to the questions and then we'll answer.
Who has a question and not a comment?
Not comments, questions, people. Okay, yeah, Maria, and after that guy next to Sana, and guys...
I don't really know. Anyway,
a short question.
Yes, it's very short. I just want to ask, how many of you read the Constitution? Because, no, I have a point. Because minorities are not recognized in the Pakistani Constitution. How can you go ahead and make claims to change something like the blasphemy law without making that crucial amendment in the Constitution?
Okay, that's a good question.
Did I make mention earlier?
And sorry guys, I'm gonna the guy next to Sana. Yeah.
My question is,
short and sweet.
Do you consider that the blasphemy law needs to be changed now if the very existence of Pakistan is at stake if we actually touch this law at this very moment?
That's a very good question. Very good question. Thank you. Just one more. Here, the lady with the pink scarf. Well, the guy, Sana.
Come on.
Is there anybody on the panel who actually thinks the law is good? Is there anybody on the panel who thinks the blasphemy law is good for Pakistan?
Okay, that's good. So I think we've got 3 questions. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the questions. Guys, wait.
I have a mainstream question.
Yeah, Faryal, 1 minute, yeah. Okay. I know how I can answer. Okay, so the first one is the lack of recognition of minorities in the Constitution, and since they don't exist, I guess Wilson has been itching to answer, since this is his forte, minority.
If I could answer that, I didn't make mention earlier that I don't think the Constitution should be Islamicised. That we should take out that it's an Islamic state, and that it should then represent all people. Then you don't need to mention minorities. But coming back to it, one thing that everyone has missed, and I've got to interject on this one. Look, you can't even trust the legal system. Shazia Bashir, a 14-year-old girl, well, she was 11, purported to be 14 when the case came to court, was when she was raped and killed by a landlord, a prominent lawyer, former president of the Law Bar Association. What happened was, when the Christian lawyers tried to fight her case, 300 Muslim lawyers boycotted the case. Not one of them has been disbarred.
Okay.
So what do we do?
Okay, I think let's kind of... Yeah, Pakistan is 97% Muslim. Let's try to go. Can I just a quick poll? Is there anyone actually who's for the blasphemy law? Because I think he asked that. And anyone on the panel, if you are for it, actually Abdullah should have something to say here because he didn't clarify. Is anybody actually for the blasphemy law?
You are for the blasphemy law.
Well, I just wanted to answer that question. That the changes in blasphemy law don't need to go to the assembly. It is really the repealing of Ordinance 20, which Ziaul Haq passed, And ordinances do not stand for very long periods of time. They lapse after a period of 3 years. But this particular ordinance has been continuing indefinitely to this day. So all that the government has to do is to repeal this Ordinance 20 and remove all those additional problems, which the blasphemy law, original blasphemy law has created for the minorities.
Wait, before. Yeah, the second question was that, considering that Pakistan is in the quagmire, to use it lightly, that it is, should we basically be even worrying ourselves with this sort of polarization, blasphemy law? We seem to be the only third world country in the world who have ideological polarity, which consumes a nation. So, Mustafa, I think that would be something interesting.
I think the blasphemy law in itself has no problem. It was there from 1927, and until Zia brought in this Ordinance 20, there was no problem, as we have heard, during those almost
10 cases.
Wilson. Mustafa, can you just answer what I asked?
Look, I think it's a really good question. I mean, fundamentally, it's a rule of law issue, and I think, like Myra was saying, it will be a difficult thing to do. And yes, Pakistan's very unstable, but you literally have someone who has, even if you think someone should be murdered for blasphemy, he's just taken the law into his own hands, and he's meant to be an elite commando, an elite policeman protecting the governor. So I think that this issue is actually reflective of broader problems in the country. And so if you don't tackle it, then it's going to promote more and more instability.
I'm just going to say one thing. So everybody here says we need to tackle these issues. This is not going to happen overnight, nor probably in our generation as well. You can't expect to educate people overnight religiously or socially or economically. The point being, we all stand for democracy, and I hope usually people do that. But when there is democracy, 160 million out of the 170 million at this very point, when you were asking this question, is the blasphemy law good for Pakistan? 160 million people say yes. 160 million people also say we want Sharia law. Now, if you want democracy, you listen to them. If you don't want, or if you're in favor of Dandaraj, then deal with them with that way. But you can't have...
Thank you. Let's take 2 more questions.
Let's take one from the lady who's got her hand up there, just in front of you, and
then the guy with the guy with the blue shirt in the back.
Excuse me, can I?
No, the guy in the blue shirt.
I actually
The grey shirt, yeah, it's you, the one who won the debate last round.
I have a question for Myra. You mentioned that 70% of Pakistanis can't write their names. I was wondering where you're getting the statistics from, because I'm writing a PhD on education in Pakistan, and I've never come across that specific.
I'll give you the rest of
I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it's not direct to the source. And secondly, I was just thinking about what the gentleman behind me said. How do we feel about, if we agree that the blasphemy law is bad, how do we feel about imposing the will of, roughly 10% of Pakistanis on the other 90% who think it's good? How do we justify that?
Okay, let's go to the next question over there. Let's try to hear as many questions as possible. The guy with the grey shirt in the back, and then we'll go Sana, the guy over there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Short and sweet, by the way, otherwise I will cut you off.
I'm going to ask a question.
Sweet. Question, just question. Please don't keep saying sweet.
Okay,
thank you.
Short.
My question is, Pakistan is constitutionally an Islamic state, constitutionally, at least in theory. It states clearly in the constitution that no laws will be made against the Quran and the Sunnah. It is very clearly stated within the constitution. If that is the case, the blasphemy law, if you want to call it that, no such a law exists in the Islamic code. This is a name which has been given by the secular establishment in Pakistan. So if you want to call it that by that name, by all means do it. But the law doesn't exist in Islam. In Islam, the law exists.
What's your question?
My question is, if Pakistan is constitutionally an Islamic state, then Pakistan should be implementing the entire Islamic law rather than picking and choosing and having a cocktail of laws. That's what my question is.
One more question. And Sana, next to you. I'll come to you. Guys, one at a time, please.
Everyone knows extremism and intolerance is rapidly increasing in Pakistan due to mullahs teaching. Is it wise to give a sharp weapon like blasphemy law in those hands who have not tolerance at all?
Okay. We've got 3 questions. Let's
take some more.
Okay, so next question Abdul.
Yeah, let's
take a whole bunch, and then we can respond to
okay.
Wow, I'm surprised by how many.
We've got a gentleman down here. Can we take this question from this gentleman down here, please? And then we'll take...
You see, blasphemy law is no problem. It's the problem of a mullah and most respected great philosopher, where Allama Iqbal said,
Excuse me, can you please not shout out when somebody's asking a question? Thank you. I think he's asking a question.
I'm coming to that. It's not my words. I said the great philosopher Allama Iqbal said, Deen mullah fi sabilillah fisab. And to solve this mullah's problem, Kamal Ataturk had done it very well. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to this lady here, just because she's been very, very insistent.
Iqbal also said,
Okay, look. This is not. Stop that, please, guys. Otherwise, I'll just end the debate right now. Seriously, don't be tricky. Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, I don't want to put anybody in the spot, but I will. I would like to ask you a question. You, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Abdullah. Because I've heard that there's indoctrination. I just want to ask you two questions. Do you think the killing of Salman Taseer was right or wrong? Just want one answer. Do you think the killer should be condoned and flowers thrown on him? Do you think that's right or wrong? Because mullahs the clergy are influencing what people say, and I just want your response to that.
Very good question. Very good question.
One more.
No, Abdullah, because it's now, that's actually a very good question. Let's start with that.
Sure.
You don't mind.
It's alright. I do debates for a living, so...
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead.
Alright, well, I think the second question is just an offshoot from the first, really. Like, should he be condemned or condoned? And if he's condoned, should flowers be put on him and gardens and so on? Well, look, firstly, just very, very firstly, I think if we want to have a very neutral, secular state of Pakistan, then just rejoin India. It's because India and we all know how they treat Christians, right? It's a province. You know how they treat I wanted to make a point because... Anyway, so I've been going to say... As for Salman Taseer, the thing about him is that he went outside the realms of Islamic law. Pakistan itself is outside the realms of Islamic law, so no one has an authority to implement Islamic law. That's the whole point. You only have authority to implement Islamic law when you have a caliph who gives the authority to judges, and there must be due process, and you must demonstrate intent, and there must be credible witnesses to a sufficient degree, and so on. So there's a very elaborate system of checks and balances. We saw hardly any people being killed for blasphemy law during the Islamic times and so on. It was very, very few and far between.
I think he says that's not.
And also in the Quran it says, in the Quran it commands Muslims do not insult their gods, lest they insult your God in their ignorance. So as Muslims, we have to guard our tongues as well. We can't insult the people, even in our own countries. Outside the realm of Islamic law, that is a condemnation.
Why did you have not answered the question?
Right or wrong that he was killed? All I want to know from you.
No. If I'm saying he acted outside of the realm of Islamic law, that is a condemnation. Anything that's outside the realm of Islamic law is haram.
So you think
this is right?
That's pretty clear.
Okay, we'll take a moment.
Can we have some answers, please? Some answers to our questions.
Oh, Sania.
Hello.
Can I just...
Sorry, first of all, thank you very much. I thought all of you spoke very well, especially Iftihar, is it? Who's next to Brother Abdullah. But my question is to Brother Abdullah. I am in favour of blasphemy law. I think it is completely blasphemous that women, children, minorities are murdered and raped with impunity in Pakistan. That is blasphemous. And I would like, and I agree with what you said, that Pakistan is out of the realms of Islam because Islam does not condone what happens there. But I would like to sort of put to you, over the last 63 years, Pakistan, for whatever reason, has picked parts of Islamic law and British jurisprudence and made it into a mess. And that is manipulated and used by the Janta, who is totally disconnected to the masses. The point is that, like you raised, the change is not overnight. But if there were to be a change, if you had a magic wand, what would that change be, that one change? Let's take 3 more questions, please. We'll take one from the lady there, and we'll take a couple from the front.
We have to change it. Summer is not here. The culture of summer.
No, 1 second. Just to let everybody know, 1 second, is that this is the last round of questioning, so we finish at 8:30. So, but just a sec. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Firstly, I think Mustafa Qadri mentioned something about the noise on the streets. All these people rallying up. I think often we forget that if you look at MPM, for example, you have thousands of people who join their rallies who are either threatened to join them
or who are bribed to join them. So how much credit can we give to these rallies of the sort of flowering and
so credit to rallies?
Yeah. And also my other issue that is, if you could comment on, is that there's a narrative that is often ignored in Pakistani history, that Pakistan was almost forced into creation when Jinnah actually wanted protection for the Muslim community. Therefore, this protection that he wanted electorally, why then do we not afford it to the minorities? Why is that narrative completely ignored in our history?
Let's take one question here, and then we'll take a question from
Hello? Yeah. I'd like to ask Mr. Abdullah a question. Yeah. Basically, you people have been saying how Pakistanis now are very extremist and the majority. You even spoke that they want Khilafat and Sharia. But if that was the case, then why don't the religious parties ever sweep the polls? Because if everybody was wanting that, then that would be the case.
Okay, so religious parties never...
no, the other question is...
No, just one question, sorry.
No, this is a part of that. Sorry. No, it's just a part of it. Don't you think it's more that the vigilante culture is in vogue and people are supporting Qadri because he's actually stood up to the ineffective government and establishment? It's not so much that it's because it's against the blasphemy and everyone is bloodthirsty for the murder. I don't think all Pakistanis are like
stood up for...
Yeah, I would like to question the lie that is being propagated here, that Pakistanis support Sharia. Not since the time of Maududi until today, as the lady rightly pointed out, have they ever voted a religious party in majority. In the province of NWFP, or formerly NWFP, which is supposed to be the hub of radicalism, it's always ANP. A secular political party, not a religious political party.
Okay, this is a statement and not a...
We like music, we like drama, we like art.
Excuse me, one more question.
Thank you. This is for... This is a question for those who are looking at Islam or the Islamification of Pakistan as a problem. Don't you think that you are totally and utterly missing the point? And I'm going to zoom a bit out of this blasphemy law debate here. I mean, we're talking about Asya Bibi, but I can raise Afia Siddiqui. Now, the state, I think the problem is, and I'd like the panel to comment on this, is that the political system of Pakistan has utterly failed its people, Muslim or non-Muslim, and it does not care about looking after the affairs of the people. So it's no point talking about the Islamification of Pakistan or the blasphemy law is good or not. The problem is, this is a headache. We have a cancer. There's no point talking about headache until we deal with the cancer, which is a rotten political system. And with regards to the point about the Islamic political parties, they are the other side of the same coin of the secular parties.
Okay, I'll take your point. Can we just get one more question from the lady in the white top, and that's all we can take. No.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Asyas Bibi was sentenced by a lower court. Why did Salman Rushdie feel the need to intervene and ask the president to pardon her when there was a higher court and a Supreme Court? When your governor yourself does not respect your judiciary, why should someone like Mumtaz Qadri, who's probably not educated or aware?
Okay, wait. Just so question time is over. Myra will answer for, the lady in white's question, and then Abdullah will answer a few, and then we'll try to wrap it up by giving each a speaker to give a chance. But Myra, you start first.
For y'all, I'd like to answer your question by literally just saying exactly what Salman Rushdie said. Maybe 2 weeks before he was murdered, and he appeared on Sama TV and was asked this question by the anchor Meher Bukhari, that, why are you going up and appealing for this woman where you still have, you still have 2 levels of appeals left? And all he said was, there is nothing wrong in me going to a destitute, poor, peasant woman who has no resources, no lawyers, no money, no monetary support, no social support, and saying that, listen, he never went and said, and I think you have to make a distinction here. He never said, oh, whatever the High Court has done is wrong, or the case that is being submitted to the legal system should now stop, and I will take things into my own hand and take it to the president. No, all he did was go and visit this woman who was being held in solitary confinement, and you know, it was all over the news. And all he said is, I will stand by you and say that maybe injustice has been done, and I will take your plea to the president of the country. However, the law will stay. I.e., you know, the High Court will do whatever it has to, and the processes of the legal system will go on. So that's all. That's the reason why.
Abdullah, you have a serious. Yeah, and Hamad after Abdullah. So at first, because Abdullah, poor guy, had a lot of questions directed towards him. Then we'll have Hamad. Then we'll have Hamad. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll respond in reverse order then to the guy who's making the party political broadcast. I guess it would seem to me that the University of Maryland and the Pew poll must be some pro-Al-Qaeda outfit. Because this horrible line that Pakistanis dare support Sharia. No, I don't see this at all when I'm using Pakistan. No, of course not. Of course, anyway. Then the point when they said that, why is it that the religious parties... Sorry, why not the religious parties don't win the election and so on? But you see, it's like, essentially democracy in many countries is electing the figurehead. Nothing changes, system doesn't change. The landlords even tell people who to vote for, and the landlords are part of the secular establishment. So I'm not surprised that the voting never produced any change. Yeah, whereas revolution, like in Tunisia and many other places, this and these produce change. So this is what the Abdullah. So the last point. One last point. And that person, yeah, the lady up there has asked, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, what change would I see? Well, this is the point. If Pakistan actually truly goes back to its roots and represents what the initial aspirations of the Pakistani people for Islam, for an Islamic state, and for what the Khilafah movement wanted, the Khilafah movement in Pakistan, they wanted to see a caliphate. You see the minorities being protected. You see people enacting Islam in an enlightened way.
Okay, Abdullah, thank you, guys, come. Hamad, you say, because you know we're going through the closing statements. Hamad, you go. Let's go with Hamad first. Hamad, take the.
Yeah, I mean, just coming back, the gentleman spoke about, you know, Pakistan must belong to Pakistanis. Pakistanis have to reclaim Pakistan. Yes, this is not the only issue. There are many, many more problems. I mean, I pray for a day when we'll see in a square in Pakistan 50,000 people demanding their rights again and demanding that they can live in dignity. And trying to pull those leaders out. I mean, what we've seen in Tunisia, for example. How can we see those images in Pakistan? These are the things that Pakistan has to reclaim for itself. And in doing so, not be exploited by those who have agendas on that turf in the world. Be it the Americans, be it the ones demanding caliphate states. Pakistan belongs to its people, and the people don't want what people want in America or others. They want what everybody wants in the world, which is dignity, justice, food, education, health. And I pray for that day.
Abdul Rahman, do you want
a point to end there, and then we can get everyone to make some last points.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now. Abdul Rahman, like a one statement, you know.
I think Ahmad hit the nail on the head. A lot of the suggestions that have been made are predicated on having a stable, functioning state, and I think this systemic catastrophes in Pakistan have led to the situation where now binary argumentation is all that's left, and even reasonable debate is stifled. I will say one thing, in my experience over the last 18 months of speaking with ulama and religious scholars right across the country, it's very interesting. Behind closed doors, you will find, even amongst some surprising characters, an incredible amount of reasonable, measured, intellectual, thoughtful debate and discussion. People are reflective, and even amongst the ulama classes, there's a great deal of reflection on the inside. Public debate in Pakistan has been reduced to binaries. The moment they step out of their private spaces where the cameras are not on, where they can speak, and where their speech is going to be tracked and dissected, is when we get into this unreasonable discussion, which says something about the public discourse in the country. And I think Hamad hit the nail on the head. This sense of the loss of dignity, political, social, economic, injustice is fueling a lot of the current mobilization that we're seeing out on the streets. The failure of the ulama in Pakistan from every stripe has been that the ulama and the religious classes should be the ones who are agitating for meaningful social, economic reform and justice. They have a moral authority which they can use to take that call for genuine socioeconomic justice to fruition and to action. And that's what's not going on. Privately they acknowledge that. Privately they say they failed. Now how do we take that often reasoned private discourse into some sort of a reasoned public discourse? And I think that's where most of us hit it.
That's I'm going to make 4 points based on all the questions that were raised. One of them is that there are lots of laws in Pakistan, but they're not taken in the spirit that they were put in there for in the first case, and they're all abused. None of the laws are actually followed. My second point is there was a lady there who mentioned why Pakistan was created. It was created for the Muslim minority at that time in India. My only answer is the principles and the values for which Pakistan was created have never been followed since its creation, hence we are where we are. My next point is Islam is the most peaceful religion in the world. Islam teaches us everything that we need to know. It's a way of life. Unfortunately, Pakistanis especially blame everything on Islam. We blame all our ills, our wrongs, what is wrong with our system, our power hungerness, and our political aspirations, and our corruption all on Islam. And my last point is...
Corruption is only on the side, right?
It's inherent. It's inherent at the moment in every walk and way of society. And my last point is, no one has the right to take anyone's life. Allah gives us life, Allah should take it away. So Salman Taseer's killing is a murder.
I want to give everyone a short history lesson to start with. When Pakistan was formed, it was actually 4 Christian MPs that created a stalemate to allow it to be formed. And the decision was made by the Christian speaker, MP Singha. When Quaid-e-Azam designed Pakistan as a vision, it was meant to be a land that was egalitarian and gave freedoms and peace, harmony to all people. Yet that's not what we're seeing. Somebody referred earlier to the issue of whether or not 160 million people in Pakistan actually want Sharia law. And again, no polls have been taken. How can we make such random suggestions when already in this room itself we know that that's not the case? I'm sure many of you here wouldn't want Sharia law introduced to the UK and would oppose it should anybody try to refer to that. Yeah. Peace and unity exists in Pakistan. Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, people of all faith live together, work together, eat together, share birthdays. Christmas is celebrated in Pakistan, believe it or not, and Christians put out lights, and they can have Muslim people coming to visit them, giving them Christmas cards, giving them Christmas presents. We forget this. In this meeting today, I don't think that's been discussed. So we know that the Muslim majority itself can live in harmony, but often, as somebody referred to earlier again, the incitement to hatred is by leading vocal imams preaching hatred from tannoys. That needs to be controlled. What would I like to see? Personally, I would just like to see a peaceful Pakistan, a restoration of justice, governments working with the legal system, solicitors who are being improper, being disbarred, just normal functioning of a country the way it should be. But how can we introduce this?
I think we've all heard the voice of Christian Pakistan a lot today. I forgot we're 97% Muslim. Just to balance it out a bit, I'm going to allow Abdullah to have a second closing statement. Sorry, it's just like...
Actually, my first, because you're answering questions, I think.
We're short, Abdullah, because we're really overrunning, and I think we're going to have a riot.
I think the best way to finish up is, well, I think, what is my role today? What did I envision myself coming here to speak about, and so on. And I think everyone's now thinks they can tell Pakistanis what to do, and so on, from their perspective. Mostly outsiders, mostly people with foreign ideologies, and so on. But I'll say this. When I talk about Khilafah, people seem to think that it's some kind of old medieval idea. And they forget that democracy is 2,500 years old. Democracy is even more retrograde than Islam, funnily enough. But yeah, people love democracy. It's just a modern idea. It's not a modern idea. But Islam is outdated, they say. Islam doesn't mean you have to ride camels or go on horses and ships. Islam is a system. The economic system of Islam guarantees distribution of resources while still permitting free enterprise. Yet the Islamic social system guarantees that men and women are respected and allowed to create very wholesome family units without the kind of social problems you see in the West. I thought that should be obvious in the West here. So what the product of liberalism. And just wrap it up. The main issue with the blasphemy law is about the protection of minorities, and the Khilafah historically has protected minorities. The Jews call it the golden age of their history, living under an Islamic state. And I think let's not forget this, and let us not be dictated to by foreign powers who themselves oppress their minorities, ban minarets, ban burqas, ban public praying in France, and so on. How dare they tell us how to treat our minorities, and they can't treat their own.
Myra, you had your statement in the beginning, so
I promise I'll be very brief.
Yeah, very.
I'm glad Abdullah mentioned that last point, because also we had a gentleman talk about Asyas Siddiqui. I mean, the problem is that two wrongs don't make a right. So the point is that all of us, it's incumbent on all of us, whether we're British or Pakistani or whatever, to be good citizens, and when there are abuses, to address them. And certainly, speaking on behalf of Amnesty, we spoke very loudly and clearly about the Asyas Siddiqui case. But we also talk very loudly and clearly about the many abuses, human rights violations that happen in Pakistan. And now I'm taking off my Amnesty cap and putting my Pakistani cap on, because I'm a born Pakistani, is that we too often are easily blame others, and there's very good reason for that. But, you know, we really have to also look at ourselves. And we can't just blame elites, we can't just blame one side or another. We have to also recognise that there are many things that we contribute as Pakistanis which cause our problems. And yes, of course, our problems are much broader than the blasphemy law. But this blasphemy law is basically a microcosm for all the other things. And the way that the current law operates, there's no Pakistani, whether they are Sunni or Shia or a minority, who's safe. At one point or another, we are all exposed to it. So we really have to think about it in those terms.
Thank you, Mustafa. And Dr. Asyas, if you want, then looking at our close, so if you want to make a final short statement.
Thank you very much. Whatever the situation, we have to accept that Pakistan is a great gift of God for the Muslims of the subcontinent. And there is absolutely no doubt about it. And not only that, the Muslims are blessed with the perfect exemplar, the perfect ruler in the person of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we must also remember that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the first ruler who enacted a constitution in 622, which is known as Misaq-e-Medina, the Agreement of Medina. And that has 53 articles which cover the best of what today's modern democracy can offer. That is the real democracy, that is the real constitution, that is the real code of conduct for Pakistan to resolve all its issues and problems.
Thank you very much. I think, apologies, it has been 8:40 now. We said we'd finish at 8:30. I'd like to make a very quick closing statement. First off, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for coming here. I think we had some very diverse views. I would also like to especially thank Anika Malik, who has done so much to facilitate this talk. She's sitting over here. And Amal Qureshi as well. And Mariam Square and Sana, so who have been volunteering very kindly with the microphones. Obviously, Rubia and I reformed, as she used at our last event, the 2 rings of Pippa. And the point of Pippa is not to somehow polarize Pakistan, but to unite Pakistan. And I think what's very, very important in this debate is that we've seen a level of confusion emerging even though we had a very diverse panel come across, which means Pakistanis basically can't agree among themselves on fundamental issues, and this is the educated liberal minority. I mean, that's my perspective on it. What this shows to me that we need a lot more discussions like this, a lot more ways for our people to come together and share our viewpoints in a civilized and public manner, and actually create a culture of dialogue, which unfortunately does not exist in this polarity.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the reason why we formed PIPA is because we realise there's a lot of groups out there. Post 9/11, you've had a lot of Muslim groups started up, a lot of Pakistani groups started up, all claiming to be the voice of Muslims or Pakistanis. And I think what we wanted to do was to generate a grassroots organisation. I don't get paid for doing this. This is a voluntary thing. We wanted to come together because we feel that there are issues, not just this issue, but many issues that have been discovered here today. And the one thing that as Pakistanis is that we don't support each other enough when we do come up with ideas. What Pakistan needs is ideas and vision and people who can put those ideas into action and be proactive. This is just a very small initiative started by 2 people. But, as we're saying, we're developing this. So, we welcome anyone to sort of come on board who's got ideas, who's got vision, who's prepared to work hard and to just kind of get those ideas out there and start creating something that can actually bring about some change and not just talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Ria. And finally, just a thank you to the Center for International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS, and thank you, the audience, for listening to us.